Good afternoon, class. This is John Van Slyke. I wanted to follow up as I promised in class with some comments a little bit about how we think to try to help us think historically. That was one of the hopes that I was trying to accomplish today, and we ran a little short of time in class. But for historians, it's really important that we sort of bear in mind that oftentimes when we look back on the past, it's difficult to not bring with us the biases of the present. And so we engage that difficult situation a little bit with our discussion today in class when I asked you to write a letter to a distant ancestor. You were confronted straight away with a lot of different challenges that come with trying to think about across history and think way back in time. And so anyway, as we continue to try to struggle with this task of thinking historically, I wanted to try to give you a little bit of a sense of the scope and the scale of time, because we're going to be looking at ancient world civilizations, and I think sometimes it's helpful to realize what a tiny sliver of human existence we'll actually be focusing upon in our time together this quarter. So my comments here are just meant to sort of give you some useful historical landmarks as well as a metaphor to help you understand the scope of history and how vast the scale of history, how big it is, and how small our experience is in relationship to the longue durée, or the long um, passage of time. So in order to help us do this, we really, as historians, we're confronted with just kind of an unavoidable bias. But I think we're wise to at least recognize and understand that we are operating under a bias. And in some ways, this bias is useful because one of the first things that historians are going to do as they approach their task is they're going to periodize the past. We try to come up with useful and helpful categories to look back across the vast expanse of time that has already passed and come up with meaningful characterizations for large periods of time. Now, the benefit of this, of course, is that it allows us to categorize and order. In some ways, it allows us to transform information into knowledge because we see these similarities across large spans of time, and that allows us to more neatly compartmentalize. But we have to know that we are compartmentalizing. And when you start compartmentalizing, or you start imparting certain characteristics to a period of the past, it begs the question, well, who's doing the periodizing? And who is applying the characteristics? Because depending on who you ask, different spans of the past have different meaning. For example, if you asked a Seattleite what the significance of the past 100 years has been, they might talk about some of the technological advances of industry in the Pacific Northwest and how the city of Seattle became a hub of important industrial giants like Boeing, for example. But if you were to ask that same question of a Native American, say a Umatilla tribesman, you might say that the past 100 years have been a period of disaster for the natural surroundings of the Umatilla and their native lands. And you might call attention to how the past 100 years have been an awful time for the salmon people who have tried to swim back up the Umatilla rivers and drainages only to encounter obstructions like dams or low flows due to irrigated agriculture. So the point is that we have to really, when we try to periodize the past, we have to be a little bit careful and understand that we're engaging in telling about the past from a certain perspective. Okay, so this is kind of a theory. It's we need it Periodizing the past is very useful, but it doesn't come without some challenges. So what follows here is I'm going to tell you about some of the developments that have happened, and I'm going to use a metaphor. And what I want you to think about is if we talked about the past 14 billion years, and this goes back to the Big Bang, which is one of the leading theories for the origins of the universe, and by extension, the origins of planet Earth. If we were to shrink all time to a single calendar year, I'm going to present these developments in the past in terms of their relationship to when they would have happened. So if we assume that the Big Bang took place on January 1st at 12 a.m. in the morning of a given year, the rest of what follows gives you a rough proportion of when different developments took place. And it ought to give you a sense of just how old the universe is and how young we hominids or humans are. So first off, the Big Bang, probably a little less than 14 billion years ago, or a little more depending on who you ask, is January 1st. Okay, easy enough. Formation of the Earth doesn't come along until 10 billion years later. So already that suggests, proportionately, that the Earth doesn't even come along in this calendar year until September 14th. So almost, we're now in the final few months of the year, which is pretty interesting to think about. The dinosaurs, which came along about 250 million years ago, would have shown up on December 14th. It's kind of interesting to note the relationship of dinosaurs in terms of the age of the Earth. They're relative newcomers, and if the dinosaurs are relative newcomers, what does that say for us humans? About 2.5 million years ago, the first hominids come along. So these are the first genus, the first genus Homo, and the species are going to come, follow with, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens sapiens. Well, modern humans, or I should say humans in their current expression, do not trace their origins back 2.5 million years ago. It's much closer to the present, probably looking closer to about 100,000 years ago. But nonetheless, the first human-like species branch off from chimpanzees and gorillas roughly 2.5 million years ago. But look at that time. That's the last day of the calendar year at 10:30 p.m. That's the first even human-like species that emerge on Earth. Then humans or hominids, I should say, will begin the domestication of fire. This means our distant ancestors developed how to use fire in a predictable way, meaning fire didn't have to be an accident. It was something that humans could control. We could make it happen when we wanted it, and that was a tremendous development. That was 14 minutes from the end of the calendar year, based relative to this exercise. Then we have the Neolithic Revolution, which is essentially the beginning of agriculture. I use the term agriculture. That's probably not the right term. The earliest quote-unquote agriculture was actually horticulture. It happened with very primitive tools. The yields were small. There weren't outside energy sources. This was all human energy that went into the earliest quote-unquote agriculture, which again should probably be referred to as horticulture. But that happened with 40 seconds left. 40 seconds left in this calendar year relative to the beginning of the universe's experience. Ancient Mesopotamia, the first city, the first civilizations, about 5,000 years ago. This is well after agriculture had been around, but after several millennia of agricultural and horticultural practice, we have the early urban cities and complexes that develop. That did not happen immediately with agriculture, and this is a useful reminder. Anyway, that happened 10 seconds, with 10 seconds left in the calendar year of this example. So civilization itself is just a mere 10 seconds on this calendar year of all recorded experience. Renaissance Europe, so we could start to talk about the formation of the modern world. That would be the final second of this calendar year. So hopefully this sort of impresses upon you just what a small, small blip in the overall history of our universe. We humans, we modern humans, we civilized humans, we post-Renaissance and Enlightenment humans come into being. Okay, and with that I'll stop for now. Tomorrow we're going to take up the issue of creation narratives and what they tell us about the early existence of our ancient hominid ancestors. All right, thank you. Good night.